Hey, this is Jon Leon Guerrero. Our guest today is Ted O'Neill. He's a strength and conditioning trainer and owner of Diablo Barbell, a private gym in Concord, California that has produced more elite classified powerlifters than any other gym in the United States with the exception of Westside Barbell in Columbus, Ohio, the proprietor of which is Ted's mentor, Louise Simmons. Ted is my strength and conditioning coach, and training in his care, I've experienced meaningful and significant results. Now, over the past 8 weeks, I participated with many of my fellow Diablo Barbell teammates in a body composition challenge. I followed pretty strict diet guidelines that Ted established. 6 times per day, 2.5 hours apart, I consumed a meal comprised of 40 grams of protein, 40 grams of carbs, and 20 grams of fat. Now, this plan was designed specifically for me, so I implore you not to try it on your own. My wife, Christy, did it too, and her diet macros were not the same as mine. She also got amazing results. We both drink a gallon of water over the course of a day. The point is, I was almost always full. The bell would ring, and I would go, Jesus, I have to eat again. The strategy was to retrain my metabolism for a specific purpose. Trim the fat without giving up too much lean mass, which is what happens with many of the typical weight loss programs. We also trained at Diablo Barbell 3 times a week for about 90 minutes a session. Mostly conditioning, a little bit of the traditional weightlifting exercises. Outside of that, deliberately no other serious training. A little bit of yoga for flexibility and some walking for leisure. The 8-week challenge concluded yesterday. Here's a brief recap of my results. I started out at 28.81% body fat. Jeez, what a fat lard. I feel like Tina. My ideal body fat percentage is 15%. I lost 18.5 pounds in total, 16 pounds of which was fat, bringing my body fat percentage down to just under 24. So that's a third of the way toward my ideal goal of 15%, which means I could conceivably be there by the end of the year. That is from being a pretty serious fat ass, carrying around nearly 70 pounds of fat, to being at my medically ideal body fat percentage in 5 months, and getting strong in the process. Of course, between now and the end of the year, there's Thanksgiving, my birthday, Christmas, New Year's Eve, so it'll be a challenge. Anyway, Ted has led the charge for my results, usually with a gentle word, sometimes with a more firm reminder of why I showed up, and always with the resounding chorus of the community of us who follow his philosophies for conditioning the body and the mind for the endeavor. And the approach has spilled over into other facets of my life. All of the other facets in my life, performance in my work, relationships, and everything else. Speaking of everything else, my partner, old Pedro, Pete A. Turner, completed the Coronado swim to benefit the SEAL Veterans Foundation, sealveteransfoundation.org, over the weekend and paraded around San Diego in his sexy Sunga from Sunga Life, sungalife.com. We are on to the next fundraiser, which will benefit our favorite cause, Save the Brave, savethebrave.org. And that event is the T. Simon R. Litke Memorial Golf Tournament at the Temecula Creek Inn Golf Course. That's on October 4th, which is a Friday. Save the Brave is a certified 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to helping veterans cope with post-traumatic stress. You can register for the tournament at savethebrave.org/event, and that link will be on our website. I'm also going to ask you to help us out by rating and reviewing the Break It Down show, especially if you like us. But even if you don't, give us 5 stars anyway. On iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to find podcasts like ours. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe, please like us, please hit the notification button so you'll know when we drop new shows. Anyway, back to Ted. He's helped me to change my robust relationship with food, increase the amount and quality of time I spend with my wife, improve my performance in all of the categories of my life, and even eliminate some categories that were just a time suck. And he did it by hiding philosophies for self-improvement and overcoming obstacles somewhere behind a pile of weights. He's a profound dude. I think you're going to love him. I sure love him. He's our guest today. Here's Ted O'Neill.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland. This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is Jon Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is Ted O'Neill from Diablo Barbell, and you're listening to The Break It Down Show.
And now, The Break It Down Show with Jon Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
All right. Ted O'Neill is a strength coach, a conditioning coach. He's somebody who works with athletes to attain levels of performance. And he has, in the last couple of months, become my strength and conditioning coach. And I will say that I've waited to ask you to do this with me because I had always heard your reputation certainly precedes you, but I wanted to experience something that I thought was transformational before I asked you. And I have, I'm in the best shape that I've been in probably the last 5 or 6 years, and it took you approximately 8 weeks of guiding me through this process.
Very good.
To start me on this journey. So I wanted to talk with you today about your history in powerlifting, in not just powerlifting, but in human performance, because I realize as I watch you that we're picking up heavy things and putting them back down again. And that is a disguise for some psychological concepts that help us to produce and perform better at other things that we do if we're paying attention.
And you're paying attention, it sounds like. So you're exactly right. One of my guys who's been here for a couple months the other day, at the end of his training, looked at me and said, "This isn't really a gym, is it?" And so he kind of caught on to the same
right.
thing, because we were talking about something that was probably a little bit more on the esoteric side of performance. And he's also had a pretty massive transformation by doing things in a way that kind of fly in the face of convention from his experience.
Hey, this is Pete. Real quick, I just want to let you guys know we are proud to announce our official support of Save the Brave, a certified nonprofit 501c3 with a charter of helping veterans with post-traumatic stress. Here's how you can help. Go to savethebrave.com, click on the link on the website, and my recommendation is this. Subscribe. Give them $20 a month. You've got subscriptions that you can turn off right now that you're not using that are $20 a month. Swap that out. Get involved. Let's help these folks out.
In a way that kind of fly in the face of convention from his experience. But he also recognized that, we're using weights essentially as the tools or the levers to create change. And that's really what that is. So there's a mechanics of transformation, and there's a way to achieve any goal. And a lot of times, just doing something like training or lifting weights for some people is a means to an end. For other people, they can use it as part of this overall process of transformation.
It's a gateway.
It can be.
For some people, yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
So you breezed past something that you said, which is that there is, and now I'm going to misquote you because it was 30 seconds ago, and that's how my memory is. But what you said was
15 seconds for me. So.
Yeah, was that there's a path to anything, not just any physical endeavor,
right? But
anything, and that's really what we've experienced here, and we've seen in each other in this community that you've created here. But I want to rewind a little bit and just let our audience know that you have created somewhere north of 40 elite level power lifters.
Yes.
And that is a classification. That's not just somebody saying, well, I sure can lift heavy things now and I call myself elite, but there is can you explain the structure of how somebody attains that?
Absolutely. And I love that question because there's some really popular modalities in fitness today that, for example, CrossFit, their tagline is forging elite fitness. And I've always had a little bit of a problem with that because they don't have a qualifier for it. So it's exactly what you said. It now creates this perception, this is someone who's pretty good at something, so now they can call themselves elite.
Yeah.
Well, in the sport of powerlifting, it's a very quantifiable measure. So much the same way that in martial arts you have a belt system. When someone starts through a white belt, and then all the way to the other side of the spectrum, there's a black belt. And if you're a black belt, you're considered a master, and you've kind of excelled through this thing, and you can now demonstrate at the highest level. The sport of powerlifting has a ranking or a classification system from class 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 to master of sport, and then elite. So what is elite? Elite, to earn an elite total in the sport of powerlifting, it's a combination of your best squat, your best bench press, and your best deadlift together. That's what your total is called, right? The total of all three lifts, and then that would fall somewhere on that classification chart from class 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 master to elite, essentially being synonymous with a black belt if powerlifting were to be looked at as a martial art.
Sure.
So to put that in some kind of a context, say if someone competes in the 275-pound division, they would have to total 2,000 pounds. So maybe they squat 800, maybe they bench press 500, maybe they deadlift 700 pounds. That would add up to 2,000.
2,000 pounds. If they're competing in the, what category is that again?
That would be in the 275 weight class.
Okay. So that means an individual who weighs 275 pounds has to combine their total somewhere north of 2,000 pounds to be an elite powerlifter.
And that's why they call it elite.
Yeah.
It's not a gimme. It's not something that if you show up regularly for a couple months or a couple years, you're gonna walk backward into it. And for some people, they spend many years training at the highest level and still really have to reach for that. So it's called elite for a reason.
Yeah. And there is now, because it's quantifiable, it does, it puts a tag on it, but it doesn't diminish the efforts of somebody who's not necessarily elite if they're training to their capabilities. For instance, if you have somebody who has physical impairment or, veteran who's lost his whatever limb,
right,
and he's doing things that are remarkable for the tools that he's got with him. And the one thing you mentioned is not unlike somebody who trains in martial arts and never achieves a black belt, doesn't make them necessarily something less than a great martial artist if they're working with the tools they've got, the best of their abilities. So let's talk about how you get somebody to the elite level, just as kind of a benchmark, knowing that what we're really talking about here is getting somebody to perform as best as they're capable and to feel those, the emotions of achievement and all of that stuff. Where did it start for you anyway?
I've been training for over 30 years. When I was a little kid, I always loved the idea of lifting weights, and I didn't get to start lifting weights until I was 10 years old.
Okay.
And then really took it up seriously as a later teenager.
Yeah.
Right, I was around.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up on the East Coast.
Okay.
Outside of D.C.
Outside of D.C.
Yeah, in Virginia.
Okay.
So now we're on the other coast.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
And I've been here for a pretty long time. Yeah, I've been training for a long time, and I was not a natural by any stretch. So when I started lifting weights as a teenager or as a young adult, I remember my first squat day was 75 pounds for 2 reps.
Uh-huh.
So to put that into context, we've not had many grown-ups here who are starting at that much of a deficit.
Yeah.
Although I never did it in a competitive setting, I spent the last couple years of my competitive career in powerlifting training for a 1,000+ squat. So it was a very, very long road that was over 30 years to climb.
Wow.
So,
but that was the mountain you chose.
Yeah.
Wow.
So for me, in going from point A to this very distant point B, what was absolutely a mountain. I had to figure things out that for a lot of people they were never even part of the consideration.
Yeah.
They may have started at a place that took me years to get to.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned a lot about process and a lot about what didn't work.
Yeah.
Because probably for 10 years I saw it took me over 10 years to squat 400 pounds, which might sound like a high amount for someone who maybe is looking at training as a recreational thing, but like in the context of powerlifting, that's not a very big number. And I was trying, right? I just didn't really know the best means, and the best methodics. So really where this turned around for me was my mentor is a guy named Louise Simmons,
Okay.
who owns Westside Barbell Club in Columbus, Ohio. It's this little gym that's probably about half the size of Diablo. And Louis been around forever. He's in his 70s. He's the greatest strength coach of all time. That's not a disputable thing unless you sound maybe a little silly if you're trying to dispute that.
Yeah.
And I say that because he's a guy who's completely revolutionized training in almost every way. And a lot of people are using his methods who don't even know they're his methods at this point.
And Columbus is a capital of the sport.
It is now.
Yeah.
So back in the early 90s.
It is now.
Yeah, it is now.
Well, that says a lot.
So Louis used to write this. He used to write an article for a magazine called Powerlifting USA. And he would write all of his crazy training ideas. And it flew in the face of convention so much that it was almost like reading a different language. And, traditionally training is, if you pick up a bodybuilding magazine, for example, like a Muscle and Fitness, they use the exact same formula now that if you picked up a copy in the 1960s.
Okay.
It's literally the exact same formula, the exact same information every single month. So most training kind of follows these general guidelines that are accepted, and this is the norm. Louis' stuff was so far out there and so ahead of its time that it was just a real curiosity to me because I wasn't going anywhere with what I was doing. And he would always leave his phone number at the bottom of the article. So, one day when I was 21 or 22, so this goes back now almost 30 years, I called him up. And sure enough, Louise Simmons answers the phone. Right?
That was Louise Simmons' phone number.
Yeah, it's Louise Simmons' phone number.
He was daring you to call him.
It's right there. So I would, call and ask him all these dumb questions. He would take his time to answer them, and he would oftentimes call back on his dime. This is back when
long distance calls cost money.
It was a long distance for those, for people who haven't been before the cell phone era. You have a landline, your phone rings, you pick it up, right? So, and it was a long distance call. So he would call back and talk to me about training for an hour, and this went on and off for maybe over a year or something, and then he had given me a lot of resources on things that I could research and read. So at some point, I realized I needed to kind of just stop asking the stupid questions and arguing with this guy. I wouldn't dare on the phone argue with him, but by arguing, I mean I would give him the counter to it and then go and still do it my way.
Yeah.
Which wasn't working at all.
Okay.
So there was a moment of epiphany that maybe I should start listening to this guy who's made all these champions, who's taking his time to talk to me on the phone and stop with my silly shit that wasn't doing anything. And that's when things really started to turn for me. So I kind of dabbled a little bit, 1 foot in, 1 foot out, still thinking I knew better somehow.
Okay.
Which is kind of a funny thing in hindsight now, a little bit embarrassing. Yeah. And then in the late 90s, really decided that I was going to give it 100% and really get after it. And that's where my lifting completely changed, and that was kind of the precursor to starting Diablo Barbell.
Wow. So was there an intellectual pursuit that paralleled what you were doing with your lifting? Because certainly when you say things like, well, I've been training for 30 years and you've been gathering influence for 30 years in training, but one of the things that I witness is that you've been gathering influence in a lot of things, not necessarily related to picking heavy weights up and putting them back down.
Right.
And that's not a process that started just the other day either.
Yes, you are correct. So probably around the same time in my early 20s, I became really fascinated with people who were at the top of their craft, like people who were the most successful at what they did. Like, what was different about them? And I want to say it was either Carnegie or Napoleon Hill, a guy who many generations before had done the exact same thing. In fact, his life's work was the study of people who were ultra successful.
Right. And so Napoleon Hill was Think and Grow Rich?
Yes, he was.
Okay.
And Carnegie was the guy who kind of built his foundation around business practices and business principles, more specifically in the sales area. What was his big book?
Win Friends and Influence People.
How to Win Friends and Influence People. So it was one of those two guys.
Yeah.
But so I was into that stuff very early on.
Okay.
When you're reading about people who are ultra highly accomplished, at some point you're going to find where they deviate from the norm, or what I like to call now the veneer of reality.
Mm-hmm.
So that then starts edging over a little bit and maybe into quantum mechanics or metaphysics. And, many of my pursuits then went in those directions because that seemed to have answers that were greater than what the 99.9% of people would both say and then just generally accept as rote. So this is what this is, and we can't change it.
That's how it is.
That's how it is,
Yeah.
right? That never worked for me. And you've been here long enough now at Diablo to know that I say all the time, every problem has a solution.
Right.
So that was a concept probably back then that I was really testing. Is this true that anything can be solved? Because you would kind of think it has to be true, right? Because the problem, by definition, should be solvable.
Yeah. I mean, a problem by definition is that there is something gumming up the works.
Yeah.
And so the solution often is
What's on the other side of that?
ungum the works.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
That was the parallel to the lifting. So from Louis' stuff, he had his ideas on things, and he had researched stuff from all over the world and giving me this list of books and all this stuff, and a lot of it was these translated Russian manuals. And if you want to read some interesting stuff that's really counterculture and training, get your hands on some 1950s, 60s, and 70s translated Russian manuals.
Wow.
And about how they were approaching stuff. And those were some really interesting reads. But it still amazes me, having gone through all that material, how Louis had created his system that would now commonly be called the conjugate method or the concurrent method. By reading all that crazy stuff from the Soviet Union and different parts of the world, he kind of pulled different concepts out and put it into a cohesive template. Because that stuff from those eras in Russia was really, really interesting reading.
Yeah.
They're sports scientists. They didn't even say, the participants for this test were Yuri and, whoever the guys' names were. It was the organism. Mm-hmm. Right, so everything they tested, it was the organism. You weren't even assigned a number.
Yeah,
it was just whatever organism was being subjected to that external stimulus. So, a very different take on it than we had in the United States at the time, where everything was really already more driven off a bodybuilding model, which was an aesthetic thing.
Yeah,
in terms of training, and we didn't really know how to train for sporting applications outside of doing general bodybuilding training, which isn't going to get it done.
I'm going to take an aside for our listeners real quick because they need to know that Diablo Barbell is, let's call it a gym. It's a large work area with about 1 million pounds of stacked up weights.
About that, yeah.
Here and there. No mirror.
Yeah, no mirrors, right?
There's no mirror in the whole place. There's a lot of strong people walking around and frankly, a lot of very attractively strong people walking around. Not a mirror in sight.
Yeah, so this is one of the deviations from what a performance center would be versus a commercial gym.
Right.
And really the whole commercial gym model in the U.S. was built off of the bodybuilding model that came out of the 60s and 70s and Arnold's era and this kind of stuff. Right?
Sure.
So everyone's looking at themselves, and that's fine for what it is. But, Diablo started as a very grassroots, underground, powerlifting or athletic training only facility. In other words, no one's looking in the mirror.
Right.
Right. Everyone is focused on improving their performance.
Yeah. There's some greater pursuit.
Yes.
And that's still true. Everybody who walks through that door has a greater pursuit. And then lo and behold, hey, you end up looking better.
Right.
But in the process of striving for something else, a lot of times you're rehabbing somebody, they've got maybe back issues or whatever it is they're fixing, shoulders, hips, and in doing so, you end up burning off some of the excess that you don't need to be carrying around anyway.
That's exactly right. So even if someone's goals aren't initially to change their appearance with the way we approach the work from our conditioning and just getting in there and learning the lifts in the best way mechanically possible, your body's going to undergo some kind of metamorphosis.
Yeah. So a couple other admissions for our audience. Ted talks about his squat at the beginning being an abysmal, what was it?
75 pounds. You know what? We weren't even in the hundreds. That came later.
Yeah. Well, when I walked in here, I'm a guy who's not afraid to lift up things and who's at a point in my life made my bread moving couches around. So the notion that I would approach the squat rack with a bar that had no weight on it and be there for a little while. And then you asked me very, very recently, after weeks of training, hey, what's your squat? When was the last time you squatted? And I said, well, that bar didn't have any weight on it. After everybody, I'm sure, chuckled silently to themselves, we walked over to the squat rack, we put some weight on it, we started going. But to say that I make this admission, not to embarrass myself for my audience, but they know I don't care about that. I make this admission because everybody has a starting point, and sometimes that starting point is someplace you don't even really think it is. I wouldn't have thought that I would walk in here and approach the squat bar with no weight on it, and then pick it up and struggle with it, genuinely struggle with it. So, can I get the bar up in the air? Yes. Turns out I was doing it completely wrong, and that my mechanics have been messed up so long that I got things to fix before I can actually quote unquote perform a squat properly.
So this is a huge part of it. How you perform the movements ultimately paves the road for your future success on the movements. So if you're just getting under a bar and doing what everyone else does and kind of trying to go down and up without having a lot of thought involved, because maybe you're not even aware of the things to be involved in, right, when you're doing the movement, it's kind of the path to nowhere. In other words, you're going to get to a certain point, and then whatever your greater weak points are going to be exposed constantly, and that's going to be your limitation, and there's really no way then to get better. In other words, in the context of not having any coaching or training or any form, your weakest link becomes your greatest defining factor.
Right.
So the more then that you squat, and then the more you practice the squat, the more you're just ingraining bad technique and being limited by your weak points.
You're going to run into that wall.
You're just going to keep chasing your tail.
It's going to remain there.
Yeah.
Because you're not fixing the wall.
Right.
You're not removing the obstacle.
The muscles dictate the groove of the movement or the exercise. In other words, if your hamstrings are weak or your hips are immobile, then those things are going to be present every single repetition until you go about fixing those as particular problems. So, and you've been here long enough to where you see that we have several different portals into Diablo. We have exercise therapy and rehab, that's a standalone thing. We have our conditioning groups, which is a standalone thing. We have our powerlifting groups. So all these different things are a way in. But then once we get here and we're learning something like a squat, there's a commonality to it, and that's I really look at there is one best way to do anything.
Okay.
There might be other good ways, and then there's a whole bunch of things that are probably not good or not optimal.
Right.
So really I've made a career out of what is always the best way to do any one thing. Well, one thing like a squat might not be one thing at all. It might be 10 different little things all strung together that look like one thing. So you can really tell when you walk in and you see someone who's received high-level training and they're executing at an elite level, even if they had no weight on the bar, you could watch someone squat and be like, wow, that person knows what they're doing.
Right.
I don't know how they know what they're doing, and I don't know what it is that they're doing, but I can tell that they're doing it through intention.
Sure.
And that's through the identification of all the little micro steps that lead up to performing something as complex and as coordinated as a barbell squat. It's very rare someone walks in here with any semblance of what we would consider high-level technique, even if they've been training for a long time, even if they've been pretty successful. There's usually something within the first 1 or 2 reps they perform that I can see exactly where we can create a transformation.
Yeah, and you've done that a lot too. I mean,
Yeah.
I had a next-door neighbor named Garrett Perkig.
Oh, okay. Garrett Perkig, yes.
Now, I don't know Garrett well.
Okay.
But we were next-door neighbors, and we were friendly next-door neighbors, and he clearly was a guy who you could look at him and tell, boy, that guy can pick up heavy stuff.
Yeah, and he did.
Yeah. But he came to you with a level of training that he had already had under his belt
Yes.
And he came to you because he knew there was a next level.
Yeah, and he found it. So, yeah, Garrett lifted for our national team for a couple years and ultimately achieved a 722-pound bench press in the 220 class, 800-plus pound squat, and a near 700-pound deadlift. So,
good gracious.
He had gone from either being right under an elite total, and I want to say the 242 weight class, to making a pro elite total in the 220 weight class. So he made quite a bit of progress at a lighter body weight even.
Wow. How much of that do you see? Because I don't see that part of the gym yet. I'm not, I'm not here for those sessions.
Okay.
I'm here for morning conditioning. I'm doing a lot of that right now, and I'm really enjoying it, but I'm not at a place where any of that stuff's going to be useful to me. So, how many people come to you with that same problem? I'm a lifter. I know what I'm doing to some degree, but I've hit a wall and I need to get past it.
Probably not enough, and that's changed over time. It's actually a great discussion point because there's this. You would think that I've said for years if everyone who said they wanted to get strong really meant it, Diablo, Westside Barbell would have a line outside their door a mile long every single day.
Yeah.
So instead, it's a little bit easier maybe to do something like online training, where you ask someone who's an expert, right, at online training.
Yes.
And they're going to write up a series of exercises, and you're going to do this in the comfort of your own home or your own gym. And,
right. And I believe you.
Yeah.
I believe you're going to do these things.
And this is kind of what you get, right? So years ago, we would get more people, I think, who wanted to really go to the next level, where now there's so many ways to circumvent the work. Another way to do that is, why would you take the time to squat 800 when you can put your 400-pound squat on Instagram, not labeled as a 400-pound squat, and everything's hashtag beast mode, right? And you get your Instagram trophy for the day.
Yeah.
And then so you don't have
to
go
hit of dopamine.
Yeah, right. It's an interesting cultural phenomenon because it's created something very, very different in terms of expectation and understanding of what the process is, or maybe used to be.
Wow. So the social media phenomenon of hashtag beast mode, or that can be encapsulated in hashtag beast mode, had really sort of hindered progress for a lot of people.
I think for a lot of people, because we kind of have these things on the opposite end of the spectrum, just due to something like social media. You have a much greater awareness of what used to be underground sports, like powerlifting or strongman competition or Highlands Games, or any of this stuff that you really before had to kind of seek out a little bit. Now it's everywhere. So by virtue of greater exposure, you have some people who are just these genetic freaks that come out of nowhere and are now doing amazing things with seemingly not a huge amount of training time. So this is, kind of created this redoubling effect of the genetic pool, I think. And so in all the strength sports, there's these huge numbers happening now that even just a couple of years ago weren't really happening. But at the same time, all the average people are tending to be a little bit more stuck in that mediocre place, where before they might have searched a little harder for something that would have given them the opportunity to go farther. Diablo.
So over time, we're going to skew the mean.
I think we already have.
Yeah.
And this gym was really made on that average to below average trainee. We've had almost no one walk in here who was a star on day one,
right,
or had some level of relevant experience to where they were already pretty good at it. We had people coming in who'd been training for years with little to no success, and a couple years later have earned an elite total, of all things, where if you were to ask 1,000 sports scientists, not one of them would have said, oh, that person has what it takes to make an elite total in powerlifting.
Not unlike your own story.
Right. Yeah. So I think sometimes like attract like, and my story was one that I took a very long time to develop, and I think we've had a lot of people come in where I can kind of resonate with their story, and then take them down a similar path, where if they're physically underdeveloped at the starting point, if we just apply a series of solutions to their challenges, we're going to get somewhere in a completely different spot. I'll give you a brief example. I tell this story all the time, but we have dozens of these. But Ken Kim, one of our lifters, now retired from powerlifting. He's a jiu-jitsu player now, but he came in here years ago and had been lifting weights for 6 years. And had been lifting weights seriously for 6 years. It was something that he wanted to do, and he wanted to get stronger and bigger, this whole thing. And he had achieved a 205-pound squat, a 185-pound bench press, and a 315-pound deadlift. So kind of on the average to below average side for the regular average gym trainee, someone who's kind of doing it on their own and doesn't really know what to do. But he spent 6 years in this labor to get that level of result. And he really struggled here in the beginning. It wasn't an easy thing. It wasn't like I showed him a couple little secrets and he flourished.
And he turned a corner, yeah.
Yeah, he physically had to totally transform. So the encapsulated version is 7 years after his start date, which is almost the amount of time of experience he came in with. He took that 205 squat to 859 pounds.
Holy cow.
185-pound bench to 500. He never could bench anything, but at least he got 500. Hi, Kenny. And then he took his deadlift up to a 700-pound deadlift, and he became an elite lifter in 2 separate weight classes, the 242 division and the 275 division. So that was an unpredictable thing to happen. Like if you looked at that guy after training for 6 years and you looked at what an elite powerlifter would look like in the 242 or 275 class, you would just say, no way.
Yeah.
And the more expertise that you have, the more you would say, no way.
Yeah.
And I probably have 20 or 30 people like that we could talk about.
Wow.
Who just literally became someone different in relation to the question of who am I as a lifter or as an athlete.
Yeah.
Even some of our other sport champions are much that same mold, to where they didn't have anything in them that demonstrated they should have been able to become great at something other than drive. So when I say every problem has a solution, if you apply an amount of desire to the right map.
Hey, this is P.A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here. And if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
To the right map, I'll say. And then I firmly believe that can happen. And I think we've proven that dozens and dozens of times here.
Yeah, and I think that's a concept that is universal across endeavors, not just lifting weights.
Absolutely.
Again, back to our human performance topic, which really it's not unlike if somebody had said, hey, I'm going to start a company and it's eventually going to be worth $66 billion and I'm going to do it because I'm going to compete with taxi cab drivers. Anybody would have looked at that and said, well, you're bananas.
Yeah.
And now here we are, because what that company did happened to be in transportation, but what they really did was they gave people time back and they created efficiencies that should have been visible to everybody else and just hadn't been done yet.
Yes.
So there was a solution, and it ended up solving a large problem to a large degree. How many people come to you and say, you know what, I've been here and I've achieved whatever I achieved here, and it has turned into achievement outside of here?
Oh, I think.
Or do you even hear those stories?
I think it goes hand in hand with the work that we do here.
Yeah.
And really we hear it all the time. So one of my guys just posted something on the Diablo forum today about his successes in all of his other areas in life, just by undertaking this recent challenge that we put up. So we do these body composition challenge things where we assign a time frame, and then we're going to teach you about nutrition for you and customize that and get your training in order. But none of that goes anywhere unless you're changing your mind about something, right? So it's not about necessarily doing the things. Mm-hmm. It's about first having the courage to become somebody different. So there's a formula to this, right?
It turns out.
As it turns out, there's a formula to this. And I learned this from this guy named Daryl Rutherford over 20 years ago in this little self-published book called So Why Aren't You Rich? I bought it thinking it was a business book because at the time I had my first, I was CEO of my first company. So I had a chain of retail stores. And so I loved reading this stuff. So he had just completely different
What did you
slant.
sell in this chain of retail
Oh,
stores?
I had a chain of specialty fitness stores. So we had high-end exercise equipment and all this kind of thing, right? Not sofas or anything.
Imagine that.
Right. So they were still kind of one foot in that side. So this guy, Daryl Rutherford, in this book, which really probably had its roots more firmly in metaphysics than in business in the traditional sense, had this formula called be, do, have, and he called it the process or the order of creation. In other words, to have an end result, prior to having that, there's things that have to occur. Mm-hmm. And the first step is you have to choose to become somebody different. And once you've chosen to become somebody different, then the things that you're naturally going to do as the embodiment of that person or that personality are going to be in line with what that person would do.
Yeah.
And that's how you're going to have the end result. His contention was most people invert the order in any number of ways. Like they try to have something by doing something, then they think they're going to become somebody different by virtue of this thing.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah, and this is what most people do. You know, all the times, I learned many, many years ago when people would want to talk to me about nutrition, and they said, listen, if you just write me out a diet program, I swear 100% that I'll do it. And I would tell them that's exactly why I'm not going to do that. Because that's someone who wants something for nothing. They want something written out so they think they're going to follow. And they never do, because they're not vested in it.
Yeah.
They haven't chosen to become someone different. They want to do something different for a short period of time. It's just not sustainable.
Yeah.
And this is a universal concept. If you look at anything, or if anyone who's listening, it can be introspective on a moment of something they got excited about. It was an endeavor, and they didn't see it through. Right? They were probably trying to do a whole bunch of stuff differently than they were currently doing. And yes, that's part of it. But the precursor to that is you have to kind of have this allowance to let go of your own dogma and your own ideas on how you're to control stuff.
Oh boy.
Right? That's the hard part.
That's the hurdle.
Because that's actually becoming somebody different.
Right.
And
acknowledging that guy you were before didn't know everything.
Right.
That's not easy for people to do.
It's a very human thing.
Yeah.
We kind of stay stuck in ourselves, in our dogma, and in our story. And then we try to use willpower to kind of grind through something to exert some kind of a change, hoping that ultimately something external is going to bump into us and our lives are going to be different.
Right.
The process is actually very different entirely. You have to kind of go within.
Right.
And let go of all those things. Otherwise, the stuff you'd be doing would already be working. That seems logical. But we kind of approach this of, I've had zero success in this area, but this time's going to be different. And
this time's going to be different. And there we go with the definition of insanity.
Yeah.
In my own brief transformation here, and I call it a transformation because that's really what has happened is, when I came here, one of the things that I pushed back on, and I don't know if you even ever paid attention to the notion that I put out there, because a lot of times, I got a couple of stories to tell too. I'll be right back to this, but first I'm going to tell this story.
Tell the story.
I was absolutely exhausted one day. We were doing 3 rounds of the medley that day, and I had done 2 of them, and I had fucking enough. And I thought my lungs were going to come out of my nose. I thought I was dizzy. I walked into the gym. I found you in right over by the reverse hypers where you're often moving about. And I said, Ted, I'm dizzy. And you looked at me and said, you know what dizzy rhymes with? And at that moment, I said, oh, fuck, this isn't going to work, whatever it is. And I just turned around and walked out of the gym. And then I remember when I said that after training, I somehow miraculously survived.
Right.
I did all of the, I did the final medley, and afterwards, I said that to amuse whoever was around. One of the people who were around was Jen. And Jen said, so what rhymes with busy? And I said, well, the point of that story is it didn't really fucking matter. Whatever it was, I knew that I was providing resistance.
Right.
And the resistance was futile.
Yes.
And that the result was going to happen if I recognized that resisting was exactly what it was, which was just a response that had everything to do with my current programming.
Yeah, so resistance is a really interesting thing, right? Because there's that saying, whatever you resist persists. Another way to look at that I often use is, in nature, anything that you feed grows.
Right.
So if you're feeding this concept of resistance, my lungs are burning, I'm exhausted, I can't do any of this, you have to really ask, is that really true in that moment? Or is that just, we feel like we're done? It's a very natural thing to feel like you're done. So,
especially with all that apparatus floating around here.
Yeah, right. So we do a lot of hard work, and it's really physically really, really hard stuff. And so when you're doing conditioning with a lot of weighted implements and you're, hustling between one and the next, so not only do you have to do it and do it properly and do it correctly, but you're being watched the whole time, and you have kind of sometimes your training partners provide a little bit of this pressure also, but you're also working with them and the whole thing.
Right.
It's a challenging set of affairs, but the more you feed the idea in your mind, I'm done, you're going to get more of what?
The same. Yeah. You are done. You're convincing yourself.
You're convincing yourself. And this is really the entire crux of how I teach change.
Yeah.
So I would say in that moment, you had reached the wall or the threshold of your subconscious programming, right? So in other words, you arrive at this place where your brain says, I'm done. And there's not really a conversation to be had with your brain when it says, I'm done, because everything in your experience is telling you, I'm done. And then it'll start making up all
I know when I'm done, I'm done.
I know my body.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, you know how you got here. So what happens is we start making all these excuses. My lungs are going to come out, this and that. And then if someone really wants to dig deep in, well, my shoulder is hurting now, my back, right? So we start trying to claim and own all these things that will support the notion of being done and not being able to go further, because in that moment, the brain's freaking out. The brain's freaking out because what's behind door number 3 is the unknown.
Right.
So it's important to know if one were to endeavor to go down the path of change in anything, how the brain and the body are constructed. Right? So your brain essentially could be said that it functions like an artifact of past events. It's like your storage of everything that you know up until this point in time.
And there's a use for that.
Yeah.
It's called experience.
It's
Sometimes experience is useful.
Experience is almost always useful depending on how you use it. Right? So your brain is designed to essentially to not allow change. The first 7 years of your life as a human being, you're essentially in delta and theta brainwave. And if you're not familiar with the different brainwave states, just know that's like hitting record.
Okay.
Right. So in other words,
your sponge years.
Yeah, your sponge years, you're building your subconscious mind.
Okay.
So 95% of the time, or thereabout, if you talk to a neuroscientist or a psychologist, we spend running subconscious programs. Only about 5% of the day we're in our neocortex. So consciously in the moment having present thoughts. We think we are all the time. It's just situationally different. In other words, we're always reacting to stimulus around us based on what our brain tells us how to interpret this particular thing in our environment.
Right.
Your subconscious programs better be really, really good. Otherwise, you're going to find that wall at some point really early on.
This is why childhood development is so crucial.
And totally misunderstood, right? So we're constantly picking stuff up. Now, that's not all the learning that we do, but the probably 90% of what's embedded in your subconscious is that first 7 years. And then past that, traumatic events, milestone events, habituation are all things that then create a subconscious program. In other words, if I choose to engage this experience, my brain's going to tell me this is how it's going to come out. So knowing that, when you hit that, like you might have had an experience before, maybe you're talking to someone in the conversation that you guys are on opposite ends of this thing. And you reach this point where you might even say, man, you're not listening at all. It's not that they're not listening. They're incapable in that moment of something different because they're telling you what they know from their subconscious, right? In other words, your external stimulus has created a reactive phase in them, a reaction. They're reacting something they already learned. It's like watching a movie and expecting a different ending.
Yeah.
They're not in a place of conscious thought. In fact, when someone has reached the threshold of their subconscious programming, if you asked a neuroscientist, they would tell you they're not physically capable in that moment of learning anything new with the way that the brain is wired, unless their level of desire is greater than essentially their biochemical internal addiction to holding on to those past thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Using conditioning, like you experienced in that moment, is a lever that we use here, the same way that lifting weights is a lever to butt you up against your limitations in your brain. Because the only way to get into the new is to actually go into the new.
Right.
If we go back to where we know and say, my lungs are going to come out my nose, I got to stop now. That just means you're stopping at a point where you can already predict the next thing. So if you go in for that third round, which, third round of conditioning is pretty heavy duty. You've already done 2. That's a 50% increase. It's going to feel like it's the deep dive.
Yeah.
You're now walking into the unknown. The moment you engage the experience of going into the unknown, now you're in the field of potential. Now new possibilities can actually happen to you.
Yeah.
They can't happen if we stay in that place of stopping where our brain tells us to stop. And people will say this all the time to me, I know my body. It's like, no, you don't. You know what got you here.
Right.
You have no idea what your body's capable of. And this is what you're going to do, and here's how you're going to do it. Ready, go. That's the discussion.
Plus, you came here because there's something about your body that you didn't like.
Something.
You wanted to improve something.
Yeah.
And now you're in reverting to programming. You're refusing the improvement.
So now I'm going to drag you through the process. And
sometimes kicking and screaming.
I'm going to hold you to the things that's what our agreement is. If someone comes in and they want to get better. I think you figured
out that kicking and screaming is harder to do when you're carrying kettlebells.
Right. Well, there's that old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And I've always felt that wasn't true, but I figured out a long time ago how to make the horse drink. You just put the horse's head under water. At some point, it's got to take air, therefore it drank.
Yeah.
So in other words, it probably wasn't the way the horse wanted to drink the water, but it drank the water. Right. So, and by doing so was probably a better thing for the horse. I digress. So yeah, we're all limited in a very real way through our attachment to the past.
Okay.
But let's think about this for a second. When you hit that point in your conditioning, if you're then not led, we'll use that word.
Right.
If you're not guided to the next thing.
In other words, I've been a member of a gym that everybody knows the name of for years and years and years. And if I was there and didn't have the environment to coax me through that spot of resistance.
Right. Then you're going to stay the same.
Yeah.
So then if you always get to this place of your resistance and you reach the limit of what I would call your subconscious programming and you stop there, your future becomes very, very predictable.
Right. And that's what your brain wants.
Yeah. Right. So your future is going to look like any day from the past.
Yep.
Situationally different. And this is how people fool themselves. Oh, this time it's different. Mm-hmm. But it's not. They're just, really a good way to know if it's different or not is if you can predict the outcome and how you're going to feel about that, then you're just replaying something that you already know. If you have like for you in that moment when you had to do that third round, you had no idea what that experience was going to bring other than discomfort.
Yes.
But you didn't know who you were going to be in relation to that process or what that was really going to feel like. Your brain just said, nope.
Yeah.
And that's not our agreement.
That's
right?
not our agreement.
I'm big on spoken agreements, right?
Yeah.
So once we've decided on a course of action, that's what we get. In the moment in time where we get to that place where it seems like that's not possible, I'm going to show you exactly how it's possible. And then by engaging that experience and using that then as a means of repetition, and this is why weights and training, right? One of the common things about weights is you always hear, I did X many repetitions. Mm-hmm. So that's how you're going to be able to test those limits. And by understanding that as a mechanism, not just as a thing that happens, but as an internal mechanism to where you engage the new experience, your brain actually has to create a new neural network in that moment to then be able to encounter the new. Mm-hmm. So that's a huge deal.
And to some degree, you you place yourself in sponge mode again.
Yeah, that's exactly what you're doing. So then you're forcing change.
Yeah.
And you're doing that by disallowing your past to become your future.
So sometimes I'm pushing that cotton picking prowler and I got, 15 more feet to go, and I don't have Ted behind me barking to get the last 15 feet. I have somebody else in front of me who's waiting for their turn at the prowler. Yeah. How important is community to this theory that you've created around be, do, have, and the change that you have to choose for yourself?
Well, you can feel it in that moment. Right? No one wants to be the one that holds it up for someone else or takes away someone else's turn. So when everyone's supporting each other, you tend to work harder for your group and for your teammates.
Right.
And so I think everyone understanding exactly what those last 15 feet feel like, right, also kind of creates this energetic, this group dynamic that everyone is kind of pulling for everyone else. It's the same like on the powerlifting side of the gym too. It's just slightly different. So that's a great example of something being the same yet situationally different.
Yeah.
Right. So really what we're doing on the powerlifting side, where we've created more elites than any gym in the world with the exception of Louise Simmons' gym, Westside Barbell. He's the only one who's done that more, and I use his system, so there you go.
Yeah.
We use the exact same levers and means in all the things that we do. Right? So it's always about getting to that place, and then whether it's a perceived social pressure, wanting to do better for your group, one of our coaches, right on your heels, kind of helping with incentive, like, do you want to do 4 rounds today or do you want to do 3 rounds today?
Or if I catch it, I ride it. I heard that today. If I catch it, I ride it.
that happens. That happens sometimes too. So, all these things are just things in the moment that kind of break you out of that place of, I'm going to stop or I'm going to quit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I tell you, the human machine is, I'm learning more and more capable of a lot of things. And one thing that I've not seen, watching over a lot of people as they train and they're doing exercises that I have to learn how to do, and they're doing things with a lot more weight. And I'm proud to say, women included.
Yeah.
There are plenty of women here who, when we're doing an exercise, if they're grabbing a certain weight, I'm grabbing the one beneath that one.
Yes.
And what I haven't seen, and I'm going to knock on wood not to be superstitious about it because I know it's scientific, is I haven't seen a lot of injury.
Yeah, so that actually creates a great talking point, because there's this fear culture in general, I would say, in training or in physical activity. This hurts, so I need to do this. And a lot of this has a misunderstanding with what process is. In other words, you can be hurt and you can be hurting, and those are two very different states of being. And they might have a similar pathology or symptom associated, but one might be totally fine to train through, and then one maybe you need to work around and do something different. So on our powerlifting side, we'll switch over here real quick to talk about injuries. We've had 26 men that have squatted over 800 pounds officially in competition, and 13 over 900, 3 or 4 over 1,000.
Wow.
0 back injuries.
Wow.
So if you go to most regular gyms, whether it's a 24-hour fitness or place where people are, think they're lifting weights a certain way and really trying their hardest, you might have a group of maybe 10 guys who have squatted 300 pounds. And probably all of them at some point have had some kind of a back injury. I know because we get people from all the other gyms coming through our rehab side, right?
Yeah.
Or through our chiropractic side. I hurt my back squatting. I can't do squats. I can't do deadlifts. Well, how much do you deadlift? 275. Oh, that's funny. We've never had an injury with, anywhere in that. So we do a ton of preparatory work.
Right.
And then just also understanding the difference. So I've had people that I've seen on the exercise therapy side who have been, quote, hurt for years.
Yeah.
And when I take them through a series of diagnostics, they're really not injured. So there's a difference between having the physical sensation of pain and then having something that I would classify as an injury.
Wow. That's me doing a squat.
Yeah.
And that's why I have had to walk up to that bar with no weight on it.
Right.
Because I am hurting when I do a squat in a place that, by the way, everybody, is not where you would think I'd be hurting doing a squat.
Right.
So the mechanics are so wrong that what hurts is that I have to fix the mechanics.
Yes.
And the hurting and the being hurt are two different things.
Two different things. So, for example, being hurt is maybe like a muscle tear, or you have a full thickness rupture of a tendon. So something is now affected, or mechanically there's something wrong with the joint, where maybe like you break a facet joint or something. So those are all injury states, right?
Right.
Tendon, ligament, muscle having some kind of a tear or some kind of a thing, or the structure itself being now mechanically altered, like maybe a space occupying lesion, which would be like a stenotic effect in the back somewhere. Hurting can have all those same symptoms, but mechanically you're still fundamentally sound. So the brain is very, very good at mapping pain. It's one of the mechanisms that's hardwired into us. If you're 3 years old and you think the red stove looks kind of neat, so you touch it and you put your hand on it, you burn your hand, and you learn really easily not to do that.
Yeah.
In fact, if you've had that experience, you can probably think about that and recall that experience in very, very vivid detail.
Sure.
Not unlike something like phantom limb syndrome. Someone gets an arm or a leg blown off in battle, and their arm or leg still hurts. It's kind of the worst deal possible, right?
Yeah,
it's like
it's not even there anymore.
It's not
and
even
still
there.
experience
It still
the
hurts.
pain.
Yeah, so our brain is exceptional at mapping trauma and mapping pain. So if we've had something that's been a little bit gummed up or tweaked or has been uncomfortable for a period of time, now we begin to have all kinds of changes in our movement pattern to facilitate this thing that's hurting. So I'm not going to pick that up this way because that hurts, so I'm going to move this way now.
Yeah.
So once we start getting inhibition from the nervous system on firing the muscle correctly, now we start having all these secondary effects that lead to more pain. And then that kind of becomes someone's story for a little bit.
Yeah.
Oh, my bad back, my bad knee, and now this is a big problem. Because even if they're not hurt, it's now part of their story where there's a reward they get for having their XYZ. And again, it's a very human thing to do.
Right. And by reward, you're talking about, maybe not necessarily a reward in the sense of something where, well, I don't have to do that because I have a bad back. Oh, I would help you guys out, but my knee.
Right.
Or whatever that excuse is.
It's something that we get by virtue of the problem.
Yeah.
Maybe we get attention for it.
Right.
Maybe we get out of having to move stuff for people.
Yeah.
That could be convenient at times. Maybe it's something that allows us to perform a different function at work just by virtue of that. So it becomes part of the story. And then if we lose that, like sometimes I'll get new people in on the therapy side and they'll have this litany of things wrong with them, and I'll watch them move and I'm thinking, I don't know if that's really true.
Yeah.
So, I want to start there then with the state of being, not the things we have to do. Because the things we have to do aren't going to mean anything to this person where they have this whole story about being hurt. I have to first challenge that as an ideology. So I'll ask them, who would you be if you weren't hurt, if all these things weren't problems? And
I'd be a superhero.
Well, sometimes, if you really want to get better, that's might be the thing you would say.
Right.
If instantly you start doing what I would call arguing for your limitations, you start saying all the reasons as to why that's not possible, and that wasn't the question I asked. The question was, who would you be?
Yeah.
Right? So people will start going down this line about instantly arguing for the things that keep them hurt. So it becomes an interesting psychology.
Yeah.
They're already holding on to something. Their mind maybe wants to get them out of pain, part of it, maybe their conscious mind. Their subconscious mind is saying, nope, if we change this, we've now fundamentally changed who we are. And if we change who we are, then we don't get this, and this as a byproduct of who we are. That's going to be a big change. The brain doesn't like change. The brain wants status quo.
Yeah.
And so they'll talk themselves into staying hurt.
My way of talking myself into staying hurt was that I've had a 50-year love affair with less than nutritious food. And it has become a part of my, it had become a part of my story.
Sure.
I mean, you could ask me about Birmingham, Alabama. Ooh, you know what? You should go have dinner at wherever. Yeah. And I got to know a lot of places that were not the place to eat if you were concerned about nutrition, although probably the most novel place to eat that involved, their fatty, whatever it was.
Right.
And that is something that I embraced for a long time because it's fun.
Yeah.
But it did become a part of my story such that it limited my ability to understand my relationship with food.
Yes.
And the unhealthiness of my relationship with food.
Right.
Now, I won't say that I'm never going to go back to this place or that place. I certainly will. But I did find myself not long ago, and this is where I figured that my transformation had really meant something. I bypassed all the things on the menu at a place we were in a place in Petaluma. I can't remember the name of the place. Everybody knows what Pub Republic is the name of the place. And they are known for great burgers and a lot of things. But they also had a salad with seasonal greens in it that included heirloom carrots. And I found myself excited about, I get heirloom carrots, which are going to be out of season next week. I better get the last of them. Mm-hmm. And I was just as excited about the freshness of the ingredients and the nutrition it was creating as I would have been about, boy, that barbecue sauce sure is tangy, and they use a lot of molasses in there, and that is so fatty it's shiny, and
then the question is what happened, and you're now embodying a different state of being.
Yeah.
So the things that person does is very different than what the other person used to do,
and somehow no less exciting.
Right. So we're always going to do the things that are in direct alignment with our core beliefs. So that's a great way then to really measure that first step of transformation.
Yeah.
You're making different choices, not saying, man, I really want to eat the fat burger with the molasses in it, but I have to have this stupid salad because my asshole trainer told me that if I don't, I have to do extra.
He wrote it down on that piece of paper, and I said I was going to follow it.
And then you do that 2 or 3 times, and that show's over. It's one of these things where by becoming somebody different, the things that you do now are fundamentally different.
Right.
So now you have a totally different result. That's be, do, have in action, right? So, it's an axiom. It can't not work. It's just the way things are. So a really good litmus test to always see if you're in alignment with the things that you are calling your goals or what you're working toward is how hard are you having to work? In other words, the training we do here is very physically demanding. That's hard. But the whole time you're driving over, you're thinking, oh man, I don't want to be here. And then you get here, I don't want to be here. This is going to suck. Or is it like, all right, so I'm going into this thing's hard, but this is part of it, right?
Yeah.
It exists in a different place. So when you begin to embody your transformation, you have it.
Yeah.
Right? So transformation is kind of the first big step. There's a step past that.
I see.
We would call that metamorphosis.
Uh-huh.
Right? It's if you look in the dictionary, it's literally the step past transformation.
Okay.
So that's just a continuing evolving of getting to a place by choice. And this is a good talking point because transformation happens via having an eye on something. That's obvious, right? Maybe we want to change our relationship with food or we want to get in better shape. And, we all kind of intuitively have these things that we know. Like if we're not doing those things, we think, I really need to get in shape or this and that. So then maybe come to a place like this and you start to get some real hands-on experience about what that really means. And then you physically transform and you mentally transform as part of this process. So if you were then to look at that as a methodology, as opposed to something that you did, you now really hold the keys to the rest of your life. Because if you did that in one place where you transform from a state of A to B, then you begin to come to realize that every problem does have a solution. And then anything that I want to do has already been mapped, right? Whether I want to make $1 million or have this job or have this kind of a partner or be able to perform this way. You already proved it to yourself then. You have to get into the unknown and challenge those things and do that work and embody the feeling of being someone different. And then all those things, over time naturally end up happening. So if you were to look at that as a series of things you could then replicate, that then begins to become metamorphosis.
Our guest today has been Ted O'Neill. This is part one of hopefully many parts. I think there's a lot for us to explore. Thanks, man. That was a hell of an episode.
Awesome. Appreciate it.